making friends, they are socializing. That would be a great way to track student engagement, which would then be tied to retention, and that would help your program survive. Demonstrating critical decision-making skills, so budgeting, saving, those could also be easily measurable. You can ask students, before this program, did you have a savings account? Before this program, did you have a budget or a budget tool that you used? You don't have to ask statements or questions that are too intrusive. You don't have to say, how much money did you have in your bank before this program and how much money do you have now, right? You don't have to ask that. Just say, did you open up a bank account after this program? Or were you banked before and are you banked after the program? Do you have a line of credit? Things like that. Have you taken a personal finance course as a result of this programming? Things like that. And then readiness for loan repayment and exploring funding opportunities for graduate school. Again, measuring that could be as easy as saying, did you apply for a scholarship for graduate school? Did you complete, if they're a public servant, PSLF? Have you acknowledged PSLF, and have you read about PSLF and the future employer that you have are they PSLF eligible? Something like that. I mean, you can easily assess that with a yes or a no, and that could be a great way to assess whether your program is actually teaching students what you want them to learn. So a lot of good ideas, and I will continue. For most administrators, and this could be folks on this call, or it could be folks that y'all report to, because at a certain point, we all have bosses that we answer to. Most institutions want numbers. I don't wholeheartedly agree with that. And actually, Dan and I had a little sidebar discussion before today about the value of qualitative data and interviewing in focus groups. There's absolutely room for that. A lot of times though, the decision makers on your campus want to know if something works. And if it works, that usually is tied to some sort of success metric or a number. So because a lot of these programs start as grants and you report to your grantor, you report to the funding source, usually you got to get in the habit of reporting to your institution as well and finding if the grant program is successful and you're reporting to the grantor, you're more likely then going to be hardlined by the institution. You have to know though what student success is for your institution. Might be different from the grantor. So here are some examples. Semester to semester retention. Your institutional research office will have this information. Now, it's more difficult, I have found, at private institutions. Sometimes the siloing of higher ed is so, I would say, oppressive and bureaucratic at public schools, you wonder how anything gets done. There's at least, though, a little more openness than I found in some data sharing. So once a student, let's say freshman year, takes one of your personal finance courses or takes one of your online learning modules, and you want to know where Jamie is at 3 years later, because you saw Jamie freshman year and now Jamie might be a junior, how do you track Jamie down? How do you track Jamie down if you had Jamie in the fall and you want to know if Jamie is still there in the spring, semester to semester retention? If you don't have access to that data, institutional research likely can get it for you, or if you're very well networked on your campus, you might know who has that information. So two questions kind of arise is, are you tracking student attendance and giving them some sort of metric for attending your program? Do you have a database? And then do you know someone on campus, or do you have a connection to get that retention data to see if Jamie from fall semester is still here in spring semester? Super important metric, semester to semester retention. Because I think across the country, first year retention and first semester retention is maybe in the 80s at most schools, 70s. But then year to year might be down to the 50s or 40s, right? Lots of turnover in higher ed. So retention, very important. Like I said, year to year is, Jamie, fall 2021, took some programming. Is Jamie still at the school in fall 2020? Can you tie your programming to retention? Or graduation rates. Very easy experiment to set up. And I say the word experiment because it's going to actually happen naturally. There are students who will attend your programming and take a course or be in a peer mentoring session. There are lots of students who you will never see. Your programming may not touch every single student. So you have actually an experiment group and a control group. You have the students that you've experimented on with your programming, and you have students who you've never seen before. Are students who go through your programming more likely to graduate than students who didn't? And those actually, if you have enough students in your programming, those could be percentages, 75% of students who take your programming graduate, but only 72% of students who don't graduate. That 3 percentage point may be some program effectiveness or, some sort of bias or error, but it's a number that would look good to an administrator who might have their finger on the button. GPA. We also know students who are more engaged at their institution have a higher GPA. If they're in clubs, if they're in Greek life, if their sense of belonging is higher, generally they have higher GPA. So you could look at students who semester to semester or graduation wise, do students who participate in your programming have a higher GPA than students who don't? Now, there could be some self-selection bias. Maybe the really good, smart, engaged students are the ones who do everything. We know those kids, so they sign up for every single kind of programming. But over time, that bias is diminished because of the law of large numbers, right? The larger sample size, the more generalizable it could be. So you start this now, you start tracking now, and 5 or 10 years down the road, you might see that truly controlling for other student demographics that you might have a great impact on GPA. One metric that's really important in Texas community colleges is course load and time to degree. Because in Texas administrators are focused on education, but more focused on credentials to get a job, right? So workforce development is the name of the game in Texas. They're really concerned about course load and time to degree because they don't want students who are in a 2-year associate's program in electrical engineering, who might be electricians. We actually want those students to graduate in a timely manner and get out there and actually work. We have shortages and lots of jobs like that. So of students who take your programming, are they more likely to be a full-time student and take 12 or 15 credits? Are they more likely to graduate earlier with either fewer credits or fewer credit overloads or fewer semesters enrolled? There's lots of different metrics for it. But because you're fostering sense of belonging, is that making the student more focused on academics? They're less likely to maybe go home on weekends or drop out a semester because they feel it's special on your campus. That will speed up their time to degree. That'll maintain their course load. Those are great metrics because administrators love degree holders, but they love 4-year degree holders even more because that means one person's out the door. We got room for one more person to get in the door, right? They want to actually award degrees. That's the entire purpose. Degree or program selection. Are your students who participate in your programming more likely to opt into different degrees, right? Select different professional paths. You can also tie some of your programming to that information. Student debt. Granted, a student has to disclose that, and you have to partner maybe with financial aid, or you can get the self-reported information from students, but you can tie your programming to student debt. So you need to do a little more advanced statistics because you're going to have to control for things like inflation, right, and rising costs of things. But you can look at, as a result of your programming, did a student take less debt their next year, the next 2 years? Or do students who go through your programming graduate with less debt than students who don't, right? Is your programming having a positive impact on indebtedness? You can easily tie to that, and I can show you how to do that in a little bit. Whether a student is banked or not. So one of the indicators of the healthiest financial students is, do they have a bank account and do they know how to use it, right? It's really, really tough to be successful in our society without a bank and a card of a card payment, a debit card or a credit card. Right now, y'all go try online shopping without a credit card or a debit card, right? Or paying for a college application. It's like impossible. So getting students banked and institutionalized at a financial institution is really important. That could be a survey item. Ask students, before this program, were you banked? Did you participate in banking? And afterward, do you now? That could be a great outcome, and administrators will be curious about that, because if students have a bank, they have an account, which they may use to then pay tuition or pay their student loans, right? They're more likely to have a source of income, or not source of income, source of funds that they can distribute to different expenses. And then whether student employees graduate. So there are some nuances here, because some of your programs might not have student employees, but very important to know that the students who you employ, because we know on-campus employment is a huge retention tool. You want a student to stay, pay them to work there, give them another reason to be on campus, much more likely to graduate, tying your student employee records to graduation and seeing if you are producing student employees who stay at the school and graduate. All important metrics. And then if you can track them, this is one piece of work that I'm doing with 4 financial wellness programs across the country. Right now, I'm working with Indiana University, UC Berkeley, Kansas State University, and University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. We are talking to former peer money mentors who worked for financial wellness programs about their postgraduate outcomes. Did working in a financial wellness program help you get a job, help you network, help you communicate more effectively? Overwhelmingly, yes. That student employment is huge to helping students find a job in a financial field or elsewhere. But participation in your program has a bunch of great benefits down the road that you might be able to tie to in a survey or a qualitative project of some kind. So in keeping with the spirit of beginning with the end in mind, you should probably conceptualize what services you will offer. So think to yourself, okay, what do we have the bandwidth for? Are we going to do courses? Are we going to have a peer program? Is there going to be one-on-one counseling? And how do we train students? Who will deliver those services? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be you and a colleague, you and a team, part-timers, full-timers? Are we going to train students? Think about your kind of human resources. And then how often do you have the bandwidth to do things? Students, much as they say they may not like to schedule things, students like scheduling things because they got to block things around courses and work and etc. Can you schedule your programming in a way that's best for student schedules? Do you know when the night courses are offered on your campus? Do you know when there are gaps in scheduling and transit periods between classes or between campuses if you're at a community college or a regional institution? That's very clever. Austin Community College knew that there was a passing period and there weren't a lot of courses being scheduled on a certain campus, which was the biggest one, from like 3 to 4 p.m. Because students who needed to commute back home or go to work at 5 p.m., they needed that travel time. So they scheduled programming for that hour block, a lot of online programming. It was very successful. So knowing how you want to deliver it and when is very important as well. And then where? Obviously, the pandemic has accelerated this, but a lot of things can be done online now. Are you going to do synchronous, asynchronous, online, on campus, in classrooms? What does that look like? Maybe more importantly, do you have access to data? Do you have someone who can get you student demographics, like the age of a student, the gender, the race, the socioeconomic status, if they were Pell eligible, if they have Pell, that's your socioeconomic indicator right there. Can you tie that to your program outcomes? How will you capture student data? So if a student participates in your programming, how do you keep track of that? Basically, do you use a CMS like Slate or Banner, or do you use Excel? We used Excel for a long time. It's very rudimentary, but it worked for us. And then, is customer satisfaction important to you? Are you actually going to survey students after you deliver programming and ask them, what did you get out of it? Did you like it? Those student satisfaction surveys, 2 purposes, right? Is your programming enjoyable for students? You can report that to the administration. Or how can your program be better, right? Asking for constant formative feedback from students, because you want students to enjoy what you do. they'll tell you what they don't like and do like. And then maybe you can cater your programming around some of those student preferences. So when you are arranging interventions then, right, when you're conducting kind of your financial wellness experiments on students, when you're delivering programming, students kind of arrive on campus, they do something, they experience some of your programming, and then you measure that change, right? So you're performing an intervention, you're giving them some sort of education. So the example that I'm going to give, this was numbers from an institution I worked for, not the name of the school, right? So a pseudonym, but here is what we're kind of learning. That the first year students are retained to second year at a 70% rate. And then you track financial wellness programming, you track your student success programming, and you find that first year students who were in your programming in fall 2021 and spring 2022 are retained at a slightly higher rate than students who did not participate in your programming. So it may have been your intervention, it may have been some other unobserved characteristic, it's an experiment, it could be almost anything, but not so directly, but you do know that there is a difference between students who are in your programming and students who are not. And so then you learn from the students who did not take your programming that they are retained at a slightly lesser rate. And there is your significance right there. So there are tests that you can run, and your institutional research office can help you run these tests. Part of their job is to help you assess campus programming. They can actually look at student demographics and say, this 74% and this 71%, what are the differences? Is it that older students were more likely to be in the programming and be retained? Was it white students? Was it students of color? Was it first-gen students? Was it lower income students? They can control for those demographics and say, with some degree of significance, that your program affected that change. And that is the intervention, and that is the partnership that hopefully you can develop with IR to get access to data and actually start doing some experimentation and testing. So when you are measuring the what of the programming, you can offer wellness courses, counseling, in-class presentations. Peer programs are very popular because they're very cheap, because student employees are cheap. I don't mean to call them cheap, but they are cheaper than FTEs, right? Structured short-term, long-term programming, right? There could be an incentive program that asks students to do certain tasks throughout a semester to get a reward. Lots of different things can be done. So the important metrics of your program could be the number of programs, the number of staff you have involved, how long the program is, and the number of students you have in the program. So here is what a synthetic version of the dashboard, I have replaced some information, but this is actually what a program uses right now to track their effectiveness. They have the student IDs. So 8675309, that student, maybe we call that student Jenny. Jenny went to a peer mentoring session on October 1st, and the duration was 30 minutes. So we can start tracking not only how many students, so there are 6 students at 6 different events on an average of 31 minutes per session. And you can start tying and seeing, okay, well, how long are our average peer mentoring sessions? How long are our average group counseling sessions? Are there differences, and should we tweak our programming? Just tracking these basics gives you a lot of insight into how students feel about your programming, how effective it might be, and where you might want to tweak down the road. But it gets more complicated, as you will see in a second here. You should also integrate the who of your programming, not the band, the people. So professional staff, student employees could be involved. Do you involve faculty members in finance and business, or community members, maybe other campus stakeholders? So you should be measuring what kind of staff are involved. Initially, I am finding at one program that student staff are nowhere near as effective as coaching students toward understanding loan debt than professionals are. I was not surprised by that, because college students are maybe in debt. They may not even understand it because they're in it and they haven't learned from it. But that was one thing that I found at one program, that the professional staff were much more successful in coaching their students about student loans based on iGrad assessments. And it was very important to know who was delivering programming. Very, very crucial. So our dashboard gets a little bit wider, right? Because we're going to start coding for different things. So now in the peer mentoring session, we code that as a 1 for student delivered. Faculty were not involved, so a 0, and other stakeholders were not involved. That's a 0. Just adding those metrics gives you an idea of how student heavy your programming is, whether or not you're doing a good job integrating faculty who the students see in classes every day or every other day or every week. And then are you integrating other stakeholders in your programming? Do students like hearing from the credit union person or the nonprofit person, right? And you don't have to create all the programming yourself, right? This is why I'm talking to y'all today. I'm a guest speaker, right? So y'all didn't have to create the programming, I did for you. And that is why involving faculty and other stakeholders in your wellness programming could be huge, especially in the infancy stages, because it's a lot to develop curriculum for an entire program. You don't have to do it on your own. There's a community out there for you. You just got to seek them out. You should also measure the how you are delivering programs, either synchronously in real time, right? Asynchronously, kind of maybe like an iGrad course or another kind of long-term program maybe. And then was it a one-time thing or was it a series of things? Is it a one-time, one intervention, or is it part of a program of interventions? So the mode and the repetition is also important. So we're adding if it's synchronous or asynchronous. So an online wellness course is asynchronous, right? You can do it whenever. Same things with a incentivized savings program. You might do things over the course of several months. That's going to be asynchronous. But then those programs are also part of a series. So now you get a wider view of how much are you doing in real time and how much are you doing in person. And then, I'm sorry, real time or synchronous or asynchronous. And then are you doing a lot of one-off programming that's kind of hard to measure? Or are you doing a series of programming that incents student participation over a long period of time? And as you can see here, only a third of the programming for this program is in a series. And generally, if you can build programming in a series and incentivize student participation over a long period of time, they'll want to keep doing it. You keep getting those data points, and that might be more effective to retain those students because they feel more invested in the series rather than just like the one-off iGrad course. You should also measure the where things are actually taking place. Is it on campus? Is it off campus? Is it in person? Or is it virtual? Because you can do things synchronously and asynchronously, in person and virtually, and on campus and off campus. So location is important. And here's where our dashboard gets a little more complicated because I've added 2 more variables, right? Whether our programming is in person or virtual, a 0 or a 1, or on campus or off campus. So then you can see, should we be doing more things on campus? Or it seems like a lot of students are doing our virtual programming, or they really like the in-person programming. Maybe we should survey them to ask what else we could be doing virtual if you want to offer more virtual programming. But without knowing the descriptive stats, you really don't know how to change. You don't know what you're measuring. So mode definitely is important when you're assessing your program. Then student, hopefully satisfaction, but maybe sometimes dissatisfaction. Is our students enjoying what you're doing? Are they going to come back? So those of you who don't develop surveys regularly like I do, you should have a student satisfaction survey out of a 5 or 7 point scale, preferably 7 points, because the wider the spread, the more nuance that you can see in your data, with a natural middle point. So students might not agree or disagree, they might not really care, so they should be allowed to select neutral in the middle. And then using a Likert scale, something like the programming was very poor, poor, somewhat poor, neutral, somewhat good, very good, and excellent. And have them choose, and then you'll get an idea of are students satisfied with your programming. That also goes in your data dashboard. So then you can start looking at things like, are students online in our virtual programming less satisfied than our students who are doing the in-person programming? How about we have really high student scores for when faculty are involved. We should involve more faculty. So that kind of assessment as you go can really help you establish new and cool programs and give students what they want. But if you don't track it, it's really, really tough to see what they want. Analyzing this data then, I've added a bunch of formulas in this spreadsheet, and I emailed Dan with a copy of this data dashboard. It's an Excel document that has all the formulas built in. But what I've done here is I've added standard deviations and correlations and means of all of the metrics. So now you can see things like how spread out the student scores are. So correlations and standard deviations are really good for understanding the spread of your data, how different it is from point to point, and how interrelated it is. So when program duration goes up, so the longer the program is, the student satisfaction might go down because students might prefer shorter programs. So if you see a negative correlation, if you see duration going up and student satisfaction going down, then you might want to say, okay, well, we need to cut off those peer mentoring sessions to 15 minutes. Or maybe you have some small group counseling and you have one or two counselors who are very, very chatty and they keep students for a long time, and students might not like that, but they might feel like they can't just leave the meeting and they have to sit there and listen to the counselor. That would be a really good thing to look at to see, are students actually satisfied with the length of our programming? Are they more likely to enjoy our synchronous programming, our asynchronous programming, all that kind of stuff. So getting a sense of the spread of the data, so the standard deviation, how different it is from student to student or program to program, and then getting an idea of how related they are. All of those correlations on the bottom are out of a -1 to 1 scale, 1 being a perfectly positive correlation. So as one thing goes up, something else goes up. And a -1 means that something goes up, something else goes down. There's an inversion in that correlation. So all the negatives are things that as something went up, something else went down. And the positive ones are as something went up, the other thing went up. So just seeing an example here in the lower right-hand corner. So with this data, you can calculate things. And one calculation was that the lower left-hand corner, 0.66. So in-person and virtual programming, there was a positive association with virtual programming and duration. So the more likely it was to be virtual, the more likely it was to be longer. There was a positive correlation there. So we know sometimes virtual programming, a student might sit around and let the program time out and come back to it a week later or a month later. It might take them a long time, right? Overall time on task. Maybe you identify that as something that you want to improve. But you are going to have this dashboard with the formulas and you'll have my email. So if you have any questions about it, I'd love to help you. But just having these descriptive stats would be more than almost any program would have that I've worked with so far. And you might notice too, if I go back a slide, that I have removed the student ID. The student information would still be there, right? I was just cutting down the dashboard so you could see it on one slide. The beauty of having that student ID in your data is your institutional research office can tie the data sets together. All the student demographics can be tied to all of your metrics. So not only do you see that just general students seem to have a 5.1 out of 7 in the satisfaction scale, but you can see, how about students of color? How about your low-income students? How about your engineering students versus your liberal arts students? That kind of stuff is really, really powerful. And if you keep a student identifier there, whatever your institution uses, a student ID, a key, whatever, your IR office can tie that key to all the student demographics, and then you can run a lot of these same calculations you're seeing now, but then broken down by demographic. And that's what you can report to your kind of decision maker, to your evaluator at your school. Other methods of assessment are also super important. If you have the bandwidth, interview folks, get those quotes, send those quotes along to relevant stakeholders, right? Interviewing the qualitative stuff is always valuable. I'm not saying it's not, but I wanted to focus on the quantitative because a lot of folks need the quant to actually justify the programming to the evaluator, whoever that is at your campus. But interviewing folks is really important. Survey if you can. And the survey can only be a 3-question survey or a 2-question survey. Right? You don't have to write in depth, just say, on a scale from 1 to 7, did you like our programming? What did you think of it? The program you just attended. Quick student satisfaction. I get a student satisfaction or a participant satisfaction survey anytime I'm on a phone call with Verizon or the gas company or the energy or the electric company. I'm getting a student or a satisfaction survey almost every single time. Y'all should try to do the same thing. Hiring an external researcher. So if you're grant funded, there maybe is a budget line for evaluation and assessment. And if you do have an opportunity to do a third-party assessment of your program, that's fantastic because you can align your findings to theirs and it becomes much more robust for administration if you're finding something and your external third party is finding the same thing. That's very powerful to justify your program. And then go to conferences, right? Network, get to know people, beg, borrow, and steal programming, get ideas for assessment, ask, how are you measuring indebtedness knowledge? How are you measuring budgeting knowledge? And folks will tell you. It's a very friendly community from what I found. So main takeaways, Mr. Moneybags says, know what services you can provide, know who's going to provide them, and how you'll collect data. Those are the top 3 things. What are you going to do? Who's going to do it? And how do you collect data, right? How do you get participation numbers, student satisfaction numbers? I talked about surveys, attendance, really important stuff. Connecting with someone in IR. Get to know someone in research who has access to data. Super important. Report regularly. Aim for semesterly snapshots. The most successful programs I've worked with, they always report after the semester ends about, we did this much for this many students. That's all you need semesterly. Yearly, maybe an executive summary might be a little bit more detailed and include some of the data that I included a few slides back. But semesterly and yearly are good goals. The snapshots can include really simple stuff like how many total students did you serve? How many total programs, and then those student satisfaction survey scores. The larger reports can then be tied to semester retention, year to year retention. If you have students who graduated, tracking the graduation rates of students who were in your programming versus who are not, all that good stuff. The yearly report can be a little bit more in depth. So that was the title and the description. I did want to add my contact info, and I sent Dan the data dashboard. If you have any questions, I am free. I do not charge to talk to people. I love learning about people and what you're doing program-wise. I'm also the director of the HEFWA research community, which is the Higher Education Financial Wellness Alliance. It's the largest financial wellness organization in the US for higher ed. And we just like learning about what people are doing because we're trying to make the community stronger. So if you have any questions, you ever want to network, you ever want to ask me a question or have me connected to somebody, I know folks who run programs all over the country in pretty much every state in Canada and Mexico. So if you want to get connected to another program, I'd be happy to make an introduction for you so you can get your program off the ground and make it the best it can be. So with that, I know I'm a little bit past my hour. I said I wouldn't go too much further than an hour, but I am happy to take questions and answer anything that y'all might want to ask. One question, I believe this is in some of your published work. Yes, Dan, I will send you a bunch of articles, some that I have written and then some my colleagues have written for financial wellness assessment. In terms of data sets, no. A lot of times those are not public. So they'll report the data and they'll give you some descriptive statistics, but they won't actually give you the data set. So I will send you some studies that have data reporting, not the data set, but I will pass along some studies to Dan to make sure that everyone has some ideas of how they can do it on their own. Good question. Anybody else have a question? I know that was a lot of stuff. I was talking pretty much nonstop for an hour, but assessment is, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Anything else from anybody? Okay. Well, I will take that silence as a no. got a thank you in the chat. Thank you, happy to do it. And again, like I said, my email is super short and sweet, zt@utexas.edu. Send me an email. I'll be happy to network with you and talk through your assessment problems. And again, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm not a consultant. I am interested in this and I like helping people out. So let me know how I can help you. And I'd be happy to do so for free, which is the best, right? The most financially well price point. But thanks for having me, everybody.
Thank you. And Zach, I just want to also quickly shout out to Sarah Bergeron from Assumption. She was the direct contact for Zach and brought him in. So thank you so much for highlighting that today, Sarah. We really appreciate having Zach here. Jen, did you have some comments?
No, I just say the same. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. It was really enlightening. And I'm glad everyone was able to join us today.
All right, thanks everybody. And I'll send around the resources when I get them.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if one more thing, I mean, if anybody wants to take themselves off of mute and ask a question not in the chat, they could do that as well. We could take a minute to do that. But if no one wants to, then no one wants to. It's all good.
All right. Enjoy the day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, crew.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.